disrespectful family return, and she touches the tussle on the sword guard shouts twice. Excitement and anxiety wrestled inside her, making her heart beat faster than usual. The city she had called home for so long, with its buzzing streets and crowded subway stations, was now behind her. In its place lay the quiet roads of her old neighborhood, lined with familiar houses and trees she remembered from her childhood. Everything looked the same, yet somehow smaller, as if the years had compressed the world she had once known. The car slowly rolled past the gate of her family house. Her hands tightened around the steering wheel for a moment before she forced herself to relax. The house had not changed much. Its white walls were slightly weathered, and the wooden doors bore the same scratches from years of everyday life. The garden, once her mother's pride, was neatly trimmed, though a few flowers seemed forgotten in a corner. Ilara felt a pang of nostalgia, remembering how she had spent hours running through the lawn, chasing butterflies and listening to the birds sing. As she stepped out of the car, the air felt heavier than she remembered. The familiar scent of jasmine from the garden mingled with something else, something she could not immediately identify. Perhaps it was the tension she had felt over the phone when she told her family she would visit, or perhaps it was the unspoken distance that had grown between them over the years. Ilara squared her shoulders and approached the front door, trying to appear confident. The moment she entered the house, memories rushed back. The floor creaked under her feet in the same familiar way, and the faint smell of polished wood brought back countless afternoons spent helping her mother dust the furniture. But the living room, with its tall windows and heavy curtains, felt strangely cold. The air seemed thicker, charged with the quiet judgment of her family. "Ilara is here," her mother called from the kitchen, her voice carrying that same faintly disapproving tone that had marked so many of their past conversations. Her father appeared in the hallway, adjusting his glasses and giving her a curt nod. It was not hostile exactly, but there was no warmth in his eyes. Ilara forced herself to smile. Her younger brother, who had grown taller than her in the years she had been away, looked up from his phone and smirked. That smirk, casual and mocking at the same time, reminded her instantly of why she had felt such a strong need to leave home. "I see you've been keeping busy in the city," her father said, his words polite but carrying an edge she had learned to recognize. "Working, I assume." "Yes," Ilara replied simply. "It's been a good few years." Her mother appeared beside her father, wiping her hands on a towel. "And you're still living alone. That's brave," she said, her voice tinged with what Ilara recognized as both concern and judgment. Ilara nodded politely. She had learned long ago that arguing with her family rarely led anywhere. She had chosen her career, her friends, and her lifestyle independently, and each choice had been quietly, or sometimes openly, criticized. But she had survived, grown stronger, and learned that her happiness did not depend on their approval. The living room held many memories. The couch, slightly faded, still carried the imprint of countless family gatherings. The coffee table bore scratches that spoke of decades of use, each mark a story in itself. But what caught Ilara's attention most was the corner of the room, where a ceremonial sword rested on a wall mount. It was a family heirloom, a symbol of pride that had always fascinated her as a child. The sword was elegant, its metal gleaming under the sunlight that filtered through the curtains. A small tussel hung from the guard, worn with age but perfectly preserved. Ilara remembered the stories her grandfather had told her about it, stories of courage, honor, and standing up for oneself. Her fingers itched to touch it, to feel the metal beneath her hand, but she restrained herself. She knew that symbol belonged not only to the past, but also to her family's expectations. Still, just seeing it brought back a wave of strength she had not realized she had missed. Dinner was tense. The food was good, carefully prepared, yet the conversation was laced with subtle barbs. Her father asked about her work, but each question carried an unspoken critique. Her mother commented on her appearance and manners, implying, without directly saying so, that city life had perhaps not taught her enough about responsibility and humility. Her brother made small jokes at her expense, testing boundaries and watching for reactions. Alara sat through it all, calm on the outside, though her mind raced. She remembered countless family dinners where she had swallowed her words, where she had hidden her feelings behind polite smiles. Tonight, she reminded herself, she would observe, remember, and wait for the right moment. After dinner, she wandered the living room. Her eyes kept returning to the sword. She moved closer, the tussel brushing her fingertips as if inviting her to remember the strength she had always possessed. It was a small, almost imperceptible gesture, but it made her heart pound. Memories of her grandfather's lessons, his quiet insistence on dignity, respect, and courage, flooded back. Her brother noticed her staring at the sword and snickered. "Still obsessed with that old thing," he said casually, though the words were meant to provoke. Alara looked at him, not with anger but with quiet intensity. "It's more than an old thing," she said softly. "It represents something important." He laughed, shrugging it off, but Alara felt a sense of clarity. She realized that the old house, the family, the sword, they were all part of the world she had left behind, but they also held a mirror to her present self. She had changed, grown, and strengthened, and tonight was the first test of whether her family would see the person she had become. As the evening wore on, Alara's parents retreated to the living room to discuss household matters, leaving her and her brother in relative quiet. He tried to engage her in conversation, but the old patterns persisted, his teasing, her calm deflection. Yet for the first time she noticed something different in him, a flicker of curiosity, maybe even respect, that had not been there before. Alara's mind wandered to the future, to the moment she would have to assert herself, to speak her truth, and to reclaim the space she had always deserved. She looked at the sword one more time, letting her fingers lightly touch the tussle. It was a gentle connection, but it reminded her of the power she carried, not in anger, but in calm, quiet determination. The night ended with polite goodbyes and murmured promises of morning activities. Alara went to her old bedroom, unpacking a small bag and placing her belongings carefully. The room had not changed much, yet it felt different now. It was no longer just a place of childhood memories. It was a space where she could gather her thoughts, reflect on the past, and prepare for what was to come. As she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, she realized that returning home was never about fitting back into her family's expectations. It was about understanding herself, testing her strength, and reclaiming her voice. And in the quiet, with the distant sound of the wind through the trees, she felt ready for the days ahead. The house, the family, the sword, they were all part of the challenge, but also part of the journey she had chosen to take. Alara closed her eyes, letting memories and hopes mingle. She knew the next few days would not be easy, but she also knew that she carried within her a courage that even the harshest words or the coldest looks could not diminish. For the first time in a long while, she felt truly prepared to face the past and shape the future, one careful, determined step at a time. Morning light filtered gently through the curtains, casting soft patterns on the wooden floor of Alara's old bedroom. She woke early, the familiar smell of jasmine from the garden drifting through the open window. It was a calm morning, but beneath the calm, a quiet tension lingered. Alara knew that being home again meant navigating not only memories, but also the expectations and judgments of her family. She sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, stretching and listening to the distant sounds of the neighborhood waking up. Birds chirped, and a soft breeze rustled the leaves outside. She dressed slowly, choosing comfortable clothes that still looked neat and presentable. As she brushed her hair, she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. The reflection showed a woman who had changed since leaving this house years ago, stronger, independent, and more confident. but the eyes still held a hint of the girl who had once felt small under the weight of her family's criticism. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that today was about observation, understanding, and quiet courage. Downstairs, the house was already awake. Her parents were in the kitchen, their voices low but carrying the subtle tension that had always accompanied family discussions. Her brother wandered in, yawning and stretching, still half in his teenage habit of teasing and testing boundaries. "Good morning," Alara said softly, her voice polite but carrying a hint of firmness. Her father looked up briefly from the newspaper he was reading. "Morning," he replied, nodding. His tone was neutral, but she could sense the curiosity beneath it, curiosity about how much she had changed and whether she would bend under the familiar rules of the household. Her mother bustled around the kitchen preparing breakfast with quiet efficiency. "Did you sleep well?" she asked, though the question seemed more habitual than genuinely concerned. Alara smiled gently. "Yes, thank you. The room is just as I remembered." Her mother glanced at her, eyes sharp, as if measuring the sincerity of her words. "Good. Breakfast will be ready soon." The family gathered at the dining table, where the food smelled inviting, yet a layer of unspoken tension hovered over the conversation. Her father asked about her work, her city life, and her friends, each question polite on the surface but carrying subtle judgment. Her mother, as always, had a comment ready about her appearance or manners, suggesting, without saying directly, that the city had not taught her enough about responsibility and family values. Her brother, never one to miss an opportunity, made small jokes at her expense. "Did the city teach you how to make proper tea?" he asked with a grin. Alara kept her composure, answering calmly, "I think I managed fine, thank you." Her response was simple, but it carried a quiet confidence that her brother noticed. The small smile she gave him held a gentle firmness, a reminder that while she could engage in light conversation, she would not allow mockery to unsettle her. After breakfast, Alara decided to explore the house a little. She moved slowly, taking in the familiar rooms with fresh eyes. The living room, with its tall windows and polished wooden floor, seemed more imposing than comforting. She felt the weight of years of expectations and judgments in the very air. Yet there in the corner the sword still rested on its mount, the tussel swaying slightly as the morning breeze brushed through the room. She walked closer, almost instinctively, and let her fingers brush against the tussel. The touch was gentle, almost reverent. Memories of her grandfather filled her mind, the stories he had told about courage, honor, and standing firm in the face of adversity. For a moment, she closed her eyes, letting the memories remind her of the strength she carried within. Her brother wandered into the room, noticing her interest. "You still care about that old thing?" he asked, a teasing smile on his face. Alara looked at him calmly, a soft intensity in her eyes. "It's not just an old thing," she said. "It's a reminder of what's important: courage, respect, and standing up for yourself." He raised his eyebrows, clearly intrigued but unwilling to admit it openly. For the first time in years, he seemed to see her differently, not just as a sister who had left, but as a person who had grown, matured, and gained strength. Later that morning, she helped her mother with small chores around the house. Her mother watched her with a careful, almost critical eye, offering instructions and corrections in a gentle tone that still carried the weight of past criticisms. Alara responded patiently, following the instructions but also making small choices of her own, subtly asserting her independence. The balance between respect and self-assurance was delicate, but she handled it with grace. The afternoon brought a quiet moment in the garden. Alara walked among the flowers, her fingers brushing against petals and leaves. She remembered the afternoons of her childhood, running barefoot across the lawn, playing games, and listening to her mother hum quietly. The garden had been a place of comfort, a space where she could imagine the world differently. Now, it was a place of reflection, reminding her of both the joys and the challenges of her past. Her father joined her briefly, carrying a small basket of garden tools. He began trimming the plants, working silently for a few minutes before speaking. "The garden looks well kept," he said, his tone neutral but his eyes assessing. "I see you still notice the details." Alara nodded, returning the compliment. "It has been a long time, but the garden always felt like home. It reminds me of patience and care." Her father paused, perhaps surprised by her thoughtful response. There was no immediate reply, only a quiet acknowledgement in his eyes. It was a small victory, but a meaningful one, as she realized that asserting herself calmly and confidently could shift the dynamics of their interactions. As the day progressed, subtle tensions continued to arise. Her brother made a few more playful jabs. Her mother offered advice she did not ask for, and her father observed quietly, as if weighing each word. Alara handled each moment with poise, speaking only when necessary and allowing her calm confidence to speak louder than arguments or disagreements. Later, as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, Alara returned to the living room. The sword still rested in its place, the tussel swaying gently in the evening breeze. She walked closer, letting her fingers brush against it again. There was a strange comfort in the gesture, a connection to both her past and the person she had become. The sword represented more than family pride. It was a symbol of courage, integrity, and the power of standing firm without aggression. Her brother watched silently from across the room. For the first time, he seemed to see not just the sister who had left, but a woman who had grown into her own strength. He said nothing, but his quiet presence was a small acknowledgement of her journey and the subtle power she carried. Evening came and the family gathered for dinner once again. The conversation was polite, but the air had changed slightly. There was less teasing, less judgment, and more curiosity. Alara felt it, a quiet shift in the family's perception, and it gave her a sense of hope. She realized that her calm confidence, her ability to assert herself without anger, was beginning to influence the way her family viewed her. After dinner, she spent some time reflecting on the day. She thought about the subtle victories, the small moments where her words or actions had shifted the family's perception, the quiet acknowledgement of her independence and strength, and the connection she felt to the sword and the tussle. These were the moments that would prepare her for the challenges to come. Before going to bed, she took one last walk through the living room. The sword gleamed softly in the dim light, the tussle brushing gently against her hand. She smiled, feeling a sense of readiness she had not felt in years. Returning home was not about seeking approval. It was about understanding herself, testing her strength, and reclaiming her voice. Alara knew that the coming days would require courage, patience, and careful observation. But she also knew that she carried within her the lessons of her past, the wisdom of her experiences, and the quiet strength to face whatever challenges awaited. For the first time in a long while, she felt truly prepared to navigate the complexities of her family, armed not with anger or defiance, but with calm confidence and unwavering self-respect. As she lay in bed that night, listening to the soft rustle of leaves outside, she closed her eyes with a sense of determination. The house, the family, the sword, they were all part of a journey she had chosen to take. A journey not just of returning, but of understanding, asserting, and reclaiming. She drifted into sleep, ready for the days ahead, knowing that each moment would be an opportunity to stand firm, speak her truth, and grow stronger in the quiet power she carried within. The next morning arrived with a quiet brightness that seemed almost deceptive. Alara felt the weight of the previous day still lingering in the house, a subtle tension that neither she nor her family had fully acknowledged. She got up early again, moving carefully around her old bedroom, listening to the soft sounds of the morning. Birds sang outside, and the gentle rustle of leaves in the garden brought a sense of calm, but her heart still carried a quiet apprehension. She knew that today would be different. Something had shifted since yesterday. After dressing and preparing for the day, she made her way downstairs. Her parents were already in the kitchen, her father reading the newspaper as usual, and her mother arranging breakfast with practiced efficiency. Her brother lounged on the couch, half awake, scrolling on his phone. "Good morning," Alara said, her voice calm but carrying a quiet confidence. Her father looked up briefly, nodding. "Morning," he replied. There was something in his eyes she noticed, a hint of curiosity, a slight hesitation. Yesterday had been different from other visits, and perhaps he had begun to see the changes in his daughter. Her mother poured tea carefully, her hands steady but her expression thoughtful. "Did you sleep well?" she asked, though her tone betrayed the hint of unease she could not hide. "Yes," Alara replied, smiling faintly. "It was peaceful. The house feels the same but different somehow." Her mother glanced at her, curious but silent, as if weighing her words. There was an unspoken understanding between them. The past could not be erased, and yet the present demanded acknowledgement. Breakfast was quiet at first. Her father asked about her work, her projects, and her life in the city, but the questions were not loaded with criticism as they often had been in the past. Her mother made small observations about her appearance, still noting the little differences that had always drawn subtle judgments, but her tone was softer, more careful. Even her brother seemed quieter, though the smirk had not completely vanished. After breakfast, Alara decided to explore the house again. She moved through the living room, her eyes drawn once more to the sword resting on its mount. The tussel swayed slightly as she approached, and she let her fingers brush it, feeling a gentle connection to her grandfather's lessons about courage, honor, and integrity. Her brother noticed her and said lightly, "You really like staring at that old sword, don't you?" Alara looked at him calmly. "It's not just about looking," she said softly. "It reminds me of strength, patience, and the importance of standing for what is right." He frowned, unsure of how to respond. There was no teasing in his voice this time, only curiosity. Something had shifted in the way he perceived her. She smiled slightly, not to mock, but as a quiet acknowledgement that change was happening. The morning passed with subtle tension as her family continued their routines around her. Each small interaction was charged with unspoken meanings, her mother offering guidance, her father observing silently, and her brother alternating between casual remarks and quiet curiosity. Alara handled each moment with calm confidence, never reacting with anger, but asserting her presence through patience and quiet strength. By midday, the tension reached a point where it could no longer remain unspoken. Her brother, perhaps emboldened by her calm demeanor, made a sharp remark, questioning her decisions during her years away. It was not cruel, but it carried the weight of years of unspoken judgments. Alara felt a familiar heat rise in her chest, but she resisted the urge to respond immediately. She remembered her grandfather's words, "Courage is not in shouting first, but in knowing when to speak and when to wait." She took a deep breath, letting the lesson guide her. Finally she spoke, her voice clear and steady. "I have lived my life with thought and care," she said, looking directly at her brother. "I have made choices that have brought me growth and understanding. It may not always match what you expect, but it has made me who I am." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, silence filled the room. Her brother looked at her, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. Her parents, too, were quiet, absorbing the tone of calm authority in her voice. The house, which had felt heavy with judgment for so long, seemed to pause, waiting for the next movement. Alara's fingers moved almost instinctively to the sword's guard. She let her hand brush the tussle again, a small gesture that reminded her of the strength she carried and the lessons of her past. It was a gentle touch, but it held the weight of her conviction. She took a deep breath, gathering her courage, and spoke once more. "Enough," she said, her voice firm and deliberate. It was not a shout of anger, but a declaration of her presence, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had grown into herself. The room fell silent. Even her brother, who had often tested her limits, seemed to shrink slightly under the strength in her words. Her parents exchanged glances, sensing that something had changed. Alara was no longer the quiet girl who would swallow criticism or let her voice be silenced. After a pause, she spoke again, her voice stronger this time. "I will not be dismissed or belittled. I am here, and I am ready to be seen for who I am, not for what you wish me to be." The second declaration echoed through the living room, and the family could no longer ignore the force of her presence. Her father's hand paused over the newspaper, and her mother's eyes softened as they absorbed the meaning behind her words. Her brother, too, looked at her with a new understanding, recognizing the strength that had always been there but had never been fully acknowledged. For the first time in years, Alara felt that the power of her voice had shifted the dynamic of the family. It was not about confrontation or anger. It was about asserting herself with clarity, patience, and calm authority. She realized that courage was not about dominating others, but about standing firmly in one's truth and expecting to be respected. The tension in the room slowly began to change. Her parents, while still cautious, no longer spoke in tones of subtle criticism. Their questions became more neutral, their comments less laden with judgment. Her brother's teasing subsided, replaced by a quiet curiosity that hinted at a new beginning in their relationship. Alara took a moment to reflect. The sword, with its tussel swaying gently in the evening light, symbolized more than just family heritage. It represented courage, self-respect, and the power to assert one's presence without aggression. She realized that her connection to it was not about the past alone, but about the strength she could draw from it in the present. The rest of the afternoon passed in a calmer rhythm. They worked together on small chores, talked quietly, and shared moments of reflection. Alara noticed that the house felt lighter, as if the acknowledgement of her presence and strength had lifted a weight that had been pressing on them all. She knew this was just the beginning. True change would take time, but the first step had been taken, and it had begun with her courage and quiet authority. As evening approached, she spent a few moments in the garden, letting the cool breeze wash over her. She thought about the days ahead, the conversations, the small challenges, and the moments where her strength would be tested again. She felt ready, grounded in the knowledge that her voice mattered, that her presence mattered, and that she could navigate the complexities of her family without compromising her self-respect. Returning to the living room, she noticed her brother lingering near the sword. He glanced at it with curiosity, perhaps finally understanding the significance it held for her. Alara smiled gently, realizing that this moment, simple and quiet, was a sign of change, a small bridge being built between past misunderstandings and present acknowledgement. Dinner came and the family gathered once more. The conversation was easier now, flowing more naturally, though still careful. There were no sharp remarks or subtle jabs. Alara contributed with clarity and calmness, asserting her views when necessary but always with grace. The shift in energy was palpable, a subtle but meaningful change that spoke to the power of quiet courage and self-assured presence. As the night settled in, Alara prepared for bed, reflecting on the day. She had faced old patterns, asserted her voice, and begun to change the way her family perceived her. The sword in the living room, with its delicate tussle, remained a symbol of that journey, a reminder of courage, patience, and the importance of standing firmly in one's truth. Lying in bed, she closed her eyes, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment. She knew that the days ahead would continue to challenge her, that old habits and tensions might resurface. But she also knew that she now carried a new strength, a quiet, unwavering power that could face judgment, misunderstanding, and old resentments with calm confidence. For the first time in a long while, Alara felt fully ready to navigate her family's complexities. She had found her voice, and with it, a new sense of freedom and empowerment. She knew that the journey was far from over, but she was no longer afraid of standing firm, of speaking her truth, or of claiming the respect she deserved. The house, the family, and the sword had become part of her story, and she was determined to write the next chapters with courage, patience, and self-respect. The morning sunlight spilled through the curtains, soft and warm, painting patterns on the wooden floor of the house. Alara woke with a sense of quiet determination. The events of the previous day were still vivid in her mind. She remembered the moments of confrontation, the calm but firm declarations she had made, and the way her family had listened. For the first time in many years, she felt that her presence in the house was being acknowledged, not just tolerated, but respected. She dressed slowly, savoring the familiar comfort of her old room. The gentle rustle of leaves outside reminded her that life continued, carrying forward in its quiet, steady rhythm. Today, she thought, she would observe her family and see how the ripples of yesterday's conversation had affected them. She knew that true understanding and reconciliation could not be forced. They came slowly, through reflection, patience, and small gestures. Downstairs, her parents were already awake. Her father was quietly reading the newspaper, his posture relaxed but alert, as if he was noticing things he had overlooked before. Her mother moved with her usual efficiency, preparing breakfast but occasionally pausing, her expression thoughtful. Her brother wandered into the kitchen, yawning but with a subtle attentiveness in his eyes. Something had changed in the household. The tension from previous years had not vanished, but it had softened, replaced by an air of cautious curiosity. Alara joined them at the breakfast table. "Good morning," she said, smiling gently. Her father looked up, nodding. "Morning, Alara," he replied, his tone neutral but carrying a hint of warmth. It was small, but to her it felt significant. Her mother placed a plate of food in front of her. "Did you sleep well?" she asked, softer than before. There was a pause before she added, "I appreciate your calmness yesterday. It was different." Alara nodded, sensing the shift. "Thank you," she said softly. "I wanted to make sure my voice was heard, but also that it remained respectful." Her parents exchanged a glance. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Alara noticed the silent acknowledgement between them. For the first time, she felt that her words had not only been heard, but also considered. After breakfast, she wandered into the living room, her eyes drawn once again to the sword in the corner. The tussel on the guard swayed slightly, as if inviting her to remember the lessons of courage, honor, and integrity her grandfather had shared with her. She ran her fingers over it lightly, taking comfort in the connection it represented. Her brother, watching from across the room, hesitated before speaking. I think I understand why it means so much to you," he said quietly. There was no teasing in his voice, only curiosity. "It's not just an old decoration, is it?" Alara smiled softly. "No," she replied. "It reminds me of strength, patience, and standing up for what is right. It reminds me that courage can be quiet but still powerful." Her brother nodded slowly, the first sign of genuine reflection from him in many years. Alara realized that this small moment, this quiet conversation, was as important as any grand declaration. Change often came in gentle, subtle ways, not always in dramatic gestures. The rest of the morning passed with a surprising calmness. Her mother invited her to help organize the living room, and they worked together, sharing small talk and occasional laughter. Alara noticed how her mother's eyes softened when they spoke, a hint of warmth that had rarely appeared before. Her father contributed as well, quietly offering advice about household matters, but without the critical tone he often carried. Even her brother lingered nearby, more interested in the conversation than in teasing her. Alara felt a sense of accomplishment, though she reminded herself to remain patient. True reconciliation required time. It was not enough to assert oneself in a single moment. It required consistent presence, understanding, and gentle guidance. She was prepared for the long path ahead. As the afternoon approached, her father invited her to join him in the study. "I want to talk about yesterday," he said quietly, gesturing to a chair beside his desk. Alara sat down, listening carefully. "I've been thinking," he began slowly. "I realize that I may have underestimated you. You've grown into someone I did not fully recognize before. Yesterday, when you spoke, it made me reflect on the way I've treated you in the past." Alara nodded, her eyes attentive. "Thank you," she said softly. "I appreciate your honesty. I know we all have habits and expectations that are hard to change, but recognizing them is the first step." Her father smiled faintly. "Yes, and I want you to know that I am proud of the woman you have become. I may not always understand your choices, but I respect them, and I hope we can continue to grow closer through understanding." Alara felt a warmth spread through her chest. This was a moment she had longed for, a sincere acknowledgement from her father that went beyond words, a recognition of her independence and growth. She replied, "I respect you too, and I hope we can build a better relationship, one based on honesty and understanding rather than judgment." After the conversation, Alara returned to the living room, where her mother was arranging flowers in the garden. She joined her, feeling the gentle sunlight on her face and the soft fragrance of the blossoms. They worked together in comfortable silence, occasionally exchanging small talk about the garden and past memories. Her mother seemed more relaxed, more willing to share stories from her own youth, revealing a side of herself that Alara had rarely seen. Her brother wandered into the garden, carrying a small tray with water and tea for them. He placed it down carefully, watching them work. "I never knew how much effort goes into this," he said quietly. I guess I took it for granted." Alara smiled, grateful for his honesty. "It takes care and attention," she said, "but it's rewarding. Just like life, if we pay attention to the small details, it can grow beautifully." Her brother nodded thoughtfully, and for a long moment they worked together without words. The sword in the living room, silently observing, seemed to hold the memory of their grandfather's lessons, reminding them all that strength could be found in patience, understanding, and calm determination. As evening approached, the family gathered for dinner once more. This time, the conversation flowed naturally, with fewer judgments and more genuine interest. Her father asked about her work with sincere curiosity, her mother shared stories of her youth, and her brother asked questions that showed real engagement rather than teasing. Alara noticed the subtle shift in energy. The house felt lighter, more open, and the air seemed less heavy with old resentments. She realized that her calm firmness, combined with her patience and willingness to understand her family, was beginning to create a meaningful change. After dinner, they sat together in the living room. Her parents reflected on the past, discussing moments where misunderstandings had grown into silent tensions. Alara listened, offering her perspective when appropriate, and her words were received with attention rather than criticism. Her brother, too, shared moments of regret, acknowledging times when he had been careless with his words or unkind in small ways. The night deepened, and the family moved quietly through their routines. Alara paused before the sword one last time, letting her fingers brush the tussel. She felt a sense of connection and completion for the day. It had been a day of reflection, acknowledgement, and understanding. While not all wounds were healed, small steps had been taken toward reconciliation and mutual respect. Lying in bed later, Alara thought about the day. She reflected on the subtle victories, the moments where her voice had been heard, where her family had begun to recognize her growth, and where understanding had begun to replace judgment. She realized that patience, empathy, and quiet courage were as powerful as bold declarations, and sometimes more effective in fostering lasting change. She knew that the journey was far from over. Old habits and patterns could resurface, and misunderstandings could still occur. But she felt prepared to face them with the same calm confidence that had guided her yesterday and today. The sword and tussel remained symbols of her strength, courage, and integrity, reminding her that she had the power to navigate challenges without losing herself. As sleep approached, she allowed herself a small smile. The house, once heavy with judgment, now carried a sense of possibility. Her family, once distant and critical, had begun to reflect, understand, and connect. Alara knew that each day offered opportunities to strengthen these bonds, to foster mutual respect, and to continue her journey of growth and reconciliation. With a heart full of hope and quiet confidence, she closed her eyes, ready to face the days ahead. The lessons of courage, patience, and integrity were no longer just memories. They were alive within her, guiding her steps as she continued to navigate her family's world with understanding, compassion, and strength. The next morning arrived with a soft glow that filtered gently through the curtains, and Alara felt a sense of calm she had not known in years. The house, once heavy with tension and unspoken judgment, now felt lighter, almost welcoming. She stretched and rose from bed slowly, savoring the quiet moments before the day began. Today, she realized, would mark the conclusion of her visit, not with confrontation, but with understanding, reflection, and the quiet pride that comes from reclaiming one's voice. Downstairs, her parents were awake and moving about the kitchen with their usual routines, but something in the air had shifted. Her father hummed quietly as he prepared a small breakfast, a sound she had not heard in many years. Her mother moved with a softness in her steps, arranging the table carefully but without the sharp edge that often accompanied her movements. Her brother sat nearby, watching the morning light through the window, his expression thoughtful rather than teasing. "Good morning," Alara said as she entered the kitchen, her voice calm and steady. "Good morning," her father replied, glancing up from his preparations with a small, genuine smile. Her mother followed with a warm nod, and her brother waved quietly. The subtle acknowledgement in their gestures was enough to show her that the bonds of understanding had begun to strengthen. Breakfast passed in an unusually comfortable rhythm. Conversation flowed naturally, with small laughter and quiet curiosity replacing the jabs and criticisms of the past. Her father asked about her work, genuinely interested, and her mother shared stories about her own youth, inviting Alara to ask questions. Her brother contributed thoughtfully, commenting on small details of life in the city and sharing moments of reflection from his own experiences. After breakfast, Alara wandered through the living room. Her eyes naturally settled on the ceremonial sword in the corner. It gleamed softly in the morning sunlight, the tussel swaying gently as if acknowledging her presence. She moved closer, letting her fingers brush it lightly. The touch was comforting, a quiet reminder of the strength, courage, and integrity her grandfather had always emphasized. For Alara, the sword was no longer just a symbol of family tradition. It was a reflection of her own journey, the power she had found within herself, and the voice she had reclaimed. Her brother followed her quietly. "I think I understand now," he said softly, almost in awe. "It's not about the sword itself, it's about what it represents to you." Alara turned to him and smiled. "Exactly," she said gently. "It's about courage, patience, and standing for what is right, not with anger or force, but with calm and determination." For a moment they stood in silence, sharing the understanding that had grown between them. The bond, once strained by teasing and distance, had begun to deepen into something quieter, stronger, and more meaningful. Later, her mother invited her to the garden. Together they walked slowly among the flowers, their hands occasionally brushing petals and leaves. The garden, once a place of childhood play and comfort, had become a space of reflection, conversation, and understanding. Her mother spoke openly about her own challenges, revealing a side of herself that Alara had rarely seen. "You've grown into someone I truly admire," her mother said softly, her eyes warm. "Not just because of what you have achieved, but because of who you are. Calm, thoughtful, and strong in ways that matter." Alara felt a quiet warmth in her chest. "Thank you," she replied. "It means a lot to hear that. I hope we can continue to understand each other better and that our family can grow stronger together." Her father joined them in the garden, carrying a small cup of tea for each of them. He placed the cups down carefully, his movements gentle, his gaze thoughtful. "I am proud of you," he said simply. "Not for your achievements alone, but for your integrity, your patience, and the way you handle life. You have reminded us all what it means to stand firmly in one's truth." Alara nodded, feeling the quiet strength of his words. It was not a grand proclamation, but the sincerity in his voice carried more weight than any dramatic gesture ever could. She realized that reconciliation and understanding often grew in these quiet, simple moments, through honesty, reflection, and the courage to recognize the truth. Her brother lingered nearby, holding a small potted plant he had brought from the porch. "I want to try caring for something like this," he said quietly. "I think I understand a little more now about attention, patience, and respect." Alara smiled, realizing that her influence had reached him not through scolding or confrontation, but by demonstrating calm confidence, patience, and integrity. The family, each in their own way, was beginning to see her not just as a sister or daughter, but as a person with strength, perspective, and the right to be heard and respected. The afternoon passed in quiet reflection and small, shared activities. Alara helped her mother with organizing old photo albums, discovering pictures from her childhood that sparked laughter and stories. Her father shared memories of his own youth, and her brother engaged with genuine curiosity, asking questions and contributing observations that showed his growing understanding. Even the sword in the living room seemed to carry a sense of peace. Its presence, once a symbol of authority and expectation, now symbolized unity, strength, and shared respect. Alara often paused to touch the tussle lightly, feeling a quiet reassurance in the gesture. It reminded her that courage could be gentle, and that standing firmly in one's truth could create meaningful change without confrontation or hostility. As evening approached, the family gathered for one final dinner during her visit. The conversation flowed naturally, filled with laughter, reflection, and genuine interest in each other's thoughts. Old tensions seemed to have dissolved, replaced by understanding, respect, and the beginning of mutual admiration. Her parents expressed pride in her growth, while her brother acknowledged the moments he had underestimated her strength and perspective. After dinner, Alara took a moment to walk through the living room alone. The sword gleamed softly in the lamplight, the tussle swaying gently. She felt a profound connection, not only to her family's history, but also to the journey she had undertaken to reclaim her voice, assert her presence, and foster understanding. She reflected on the days she had spent in the house. From the initial tension of arrival, to the confrontation of yesterday, and finally to the calm acknowledgement of today, she realized that patience, courage, and empathy had guided the family toward reconciliation. Each step had required her to remain calm, assertive, and respectful, even in the face of old patterns and subtle judgments. Her parents approached her quietly. Her father placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You have reminded us all of what is important," he said softly. "Strength, patience, and understanding. We are grateful for your presence and your guidance." Her mother nodded, her eyes shining. "And we are proud of you," she added. "Not just for who you are, but for showing us how to listen, reflect, and grow together as a family." Alara felt a deep sense of satisfaction and relief. She realized that reconciliation was not about proving oneself or demanding recognition. It was about presence, patience, and calm courage. The family had begun to understand her, and she had begun to understand them in new ways as well. Before leaving the house, she walked one last time through the rooms, letting her fingers brush the sword's tussle gently. It had been a symbol of challenge, strength, and courage throughout her journey, and now it symbolized resolution, understanding, and unity. She smiled softly, feeling a sense of closure and accomplishment. Her brother approached, holding the small potted plant. "I want to take this with me," he said quietly, "as a reminder of patience, care, and what you taught me these past days." Alara nodded, feeling a quiet warmth in her heart. "Take good care of it," she said softly. "And remember that courage and understanding can grow in the smallest actions, just like this plant." Her parents walked her to the front door. There were hugs, quiet words of affection, and sincere promises to continue nurturing the family's bond. Alara felt a profound sense of pride, not from accolades or approval, but from knowing she had reclaimed her voice, stood firmly in her truth, and fostered understanding within her family. Stepping outside, she took a deep breath of the crisp morning air. The garden, the house, and the sword behind her were no longer symbols of tension or judgment. They were reminders of growth, courage, and the quiet power of patience and integrity. She felt lighter, stronger, and more confident than she had in years. As she walked toward the car, her parents and brother waved, their faces reflecting warmth, pride, and connection. Alara smiled back, knowing that this visit had marked a turning point, not only for her but for her family as well. They had begun to see each other in new ways, and she had found her voice, her courage, and her place within the family. Driving away, she looked back at the house one last time. The sunlight reflected off the windows, the garden shimmered softly, and the sword in the living room seemed to shine with quiet significance. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment and peace, knowing that she had achieved something far greater than temporary victory. It was a lasting shift in understanding, respect, and connection. Alara smiled to herself, ready for the future. She had returned home not only to be seen, but to foster change, understanding, and unity. And as the road stretched ahead, she knew that her courage, patience, and calm determination would guide her in every step, in every interaction, and in every journey yet to come.